Right, so welcome to the first of many episodes and many podcasts or YouTube videos, whatever we decide to do with this. Welcome to the first of many discussions where we talk about mediation and conflict resolution and everything in between. And today I'm delighted to be joined by the amazing Lynn Landry. Lynn is one of the fabulous experts that we have at Resolution at Work, and I'm so pleased that we're getting to have a chat. To start off with then, Lynn, just so that our listeners, watchers know a bit more about you, tell us a bit more about you and what you do and your expertise.
Okay, so I have spent the last 30 years really in operational management, HR management, and then in leadership and team development, exec coaching, and I guess the last few years really specialising in conflict resolution to enable people to just work together smoothly and enjoy their work and be productive and creative and go home and have enough brain space to engage with their kids and have nice conversations with their other halves and volunteer and just live nice lives really.
I feel like that point around being able to work together smoothly is really underestimated because that's a big bulk of what we do, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so today we're going to be talking about difficult conversations, and I think what makes sense to start with is what we're actually talking about. So when we're saying difficult conversations, what we're talking about and what do difficult conversations look like to you?
So these are important conversations that feel inherently risky because if they weren't important, there wouldn't be any risk. You'd just let them go. So if there's risk, that must mean they're important.
When we're saying risk, what do you mean? What sorts of things would people be risking in the workplace?
So I think it is about our fear. So we fear people's reaction and people's responses. We're not in control of that. We as humans really like to be in control. So when we're not, we feel fear. We fear that they might get upset. We fear that they might be angry. They fear that they might reject us socially. And I guess evolutionarily, we are programmed to avoid social rejection at all costs because in the early years of humans, if your child rejected you, then that meant certain death. So actually, it's the social rejection really that we fear.
You've probably kind of answered this question really, but why do you think people avoid having difficult conversations in the workplace, even when they know that they need to have them? Because I think I've probably been in a lot of organisations where people just avoid the conversation completely, and then it spirals into something just massive and horrible and ugh. But why are we avoiding talking about stuff that actually is really important to the way we work?
I think it is just that. It's that fear of being rejected. And I think we probably don't invest enough in developing the skills to deal with conflict. We don't talk enough about the fact that really, as humans, we only have two states. We're either okay or we're not okay. And both of those are equally valid and inevitable. And so we need to accept the fact that conflict is inevitable and that we need to have the skills to deal with that aspect of ourselves and communicate when that happens as much as being able to communicate when things are okay.
And what what would you say a healthy environment looks like where people are able to kind of deal with difficult conversations? I guess I've worked in places where um they use that kind of Patrick Lencioni. I'm never sure if I'm saying his name correctly, but hopefully people know what I mean. Where they use that kind of five dysfunctions model, and they talk about kind of passionate, unfiltered debate, and use that as a way to deal with conflict. I mean, that's kind of only one tool that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's many, but what would you say an environment looks like where people can have like healthy, difficult conversations, or is there such a thing as a healthy, difficult conversation? I suppose.
Yeah, I think when we accept that conflict is inevitable as part of our human relationships, and that actually it can make our relationships better, it can make our relationships more creative, which is, you know, then good for organizations and work as well, as Lencioni talks about. Then I think then we are able to understand that the skills that we need, we're able to perhaps, you know, organizations invest in those skills, they provide the support to help people navigate those conversations. We're not ashamed of the fact that there are some people that we struggle to get on with, so we don't hide it, we ask for support, we recognize that we'll click with some people, we don't with others, so actually we need the support sometimes to navigate those relationships. And you know, in that way, then we can be more honest with one another, we can be more open. That allows us to get to know one another better, which allows us to be vulnerable with one another, which allows us to build trust, which allows us actually, ironically, to have more conflict. And so the circle becomes a virtuous one.
I love that. And is there anything like surprising that you've learned about conflict in the workplace throughout your career? Is there anything that's kind of made you go, "Hmm, didn't know that much, didn't know about that, or didn't know why that would be relevant?"
I think the thing that was probably kind of knew it intuitively, but a lady called Kim Scott, who wrote Radical Candor, brought it to the front of my mind when she talks about not having a difficult conversation to avoid potential conflict is inherently a selfish act. And that
Tell me more.
made me really sit up and think.
Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, she doesn't necessarily use those words. I'm, you know, praising her, but she talks about a concept called ruinous empathy. She talks about that to have a difficult conversation, you need to care personally and challenge directly. So make sure you're empathetic and be clear and comprehensive in the way you communicate your message. And she says, if you care too much about upsetting somebody, then potentially you don't give them the information you need, the difficult information, the information rather that you know that might sting, that they might find difficult, that they might get upset about. If you don't share that information, actually, then you take away their choice about how to deal with that information and whether they do want to use it for their personal and professional growth. And you are doing that from a position of not wanting to feel their reaction.
That's very deep. Thought of it that way. Um, I guess we're starting to get into tips and hints a little bit now, aren't we? Which is fabulous. I mean, another question I had was, are there any kind of recurring mistakes that you see managers making after conflict? So if they've gone through that process, they've had a difficult conversation, what are some of the pitfalls that people fall into after they've done that?
I think sometimes thinking, well, we've had a conversation, we've, you know, we have, as far as I'm concerned, we've put it to bed, done. And that might be the case and that might be fine. but sometimes it's not a one-off conversation. There might be some lingering, and you might go away from that conversation and both of you genuinely feel like it's sorted. But then one or other of you goes away and thinks about it and something else bubbles up, or there feels like there's something else that needs saying. So I think it's checking in really, that actually this situation really is resolved. So going back and, how do you feel about the conversation that we had last week? I just want to make sure that actually you do feel we've resolved the situation. Want to check in case there's anything else that's bubbled up since we last spoke. So it's not about raking over what you've already talked about, but making sure you keep the conversation channel open.
If you've gone through what's quite a difficult conversation, you're probably feeling a little bit vulnerable, right? And maybe you just need a little bit of kind of virtual arm around, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's keeping that empathy going, keeping observing what is going on, making sure that person, particularly if you're their manager, their well-being to a certain extent is in your hands. So they will be looking to you to make sure that the relationship really is okay and you really are going forward.
So we are getting into the practical stuff here, which is fabulous. Are there any kind of tips or hints that you would give people who are going into difficult conversations, things that it's important for them to be mindful of?
I think be clear about your intention. So why are you having the conversation? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to the other person? What impact do you want to have? Be aware of your own perspective and make sure you're thinking as widely as possible. And yeah, plan your message. Make sure that you are empathetic. Make sure you are factual. And timing is everything.
How many times have you tried to have a conversation with someone and it's just not the right time and it just doesn't go right?
Totally.
Alrighty. What about in situations where the person that you're trying to have a conversation with shuts down or just doesn't want to engage? How can people deal with kind of being stonewalled a little bit?
Yeah, and I think this happens, doesn't it? I think it depends on your default reaction and response to conflict. So my personal response tends to be, right, let's get this sorted out now. And people the majority of people really tend to want to go away and have a think about this first and work out kind of, well, what do I really think about this? What do I think of the rights and wrongs? What do I want to say? What do I not want to say? People, and I certainly remember having this where I had to wait a whole month to be able to go back and have the conversation that actually resolved the conflict. So, I went back. Initially, I kind of rushed them by wanting to do it my way and have the conversation. And as you talked about, they completely shut down. And so I went back after a week and said, I think we really need to talk about this and sort this out. And they literally went, not ready. It was kind of hand up, go away, basically. So, right. So I went away, came back another week later and said, you ready now? No. When do you think you might be ready to talk about this? And then I need another 2 weeks. Right. Okay. And I knew I had to keep going back because I knew the temptation for this individual was just to kind of avoid and not have the conversation. And I knew that would just push the conflict down because I knew that it was important for this person. I also knew it was important for me, and I was concerned that if we didn't resolve it, we actually wouldn't be able to have any working relationship at all, which we really needed to. And, they did say 2 weeks, and they gave me a sort of deadline. And so I came back after 2 weeks, and fair play, we had a really rational conversation, and we did talk about what was important, and we talked about it sensibly, and we were able to come to an arrangement where we still had a working relationship. It wasn't easy, and we were never going to be best friends, but we were able to resolve it. We just had to wait.
Mm. How did that sit with you? Because that's quite a long period of time to have to wait to try and resolve something that was obviously kind of weighing on your mind.
It was horrible, to be honest. You have nervous tummy a lot of the time, and there was a lot of internal chatter going on and anxiety around it. Equally, I guess I knew from experience that there was no other option. If I wanted to get this conflict resolved, and I wanted to get it resolved as quickly as possible, actually pushing it was not going to was not going to help the situation. It was actually potentially going to push that person further away.
What about the flip side of the coin? So that's an example where, obviously take the point that you had to wait, but it sounds like you had a constructive conversation afterwards. What about situations where you have a conversation with someone and it doesn't fix it, it doesn't resolve the issue? What would you say are the next steps that people should then be looking at?
Yeah, I think, and that happens. Sometimes we can't resolve the conflict between us, and that's normal, and we should accept that as normal and be able to ask for help. And I would love to see more conflict coaches be trained in our workplaces, people you can go to who you can just talk to honestly about the conflict you're experiencing. They help you to see it from all angles. They ask you questions to talk about what you've tried and what's worked and what's not, and to enable you um to get to perhaps a new plan, to be able to go and try something different, so that you're still resolving it between the two of you, but you've been able to have that help to approach it differently. So I think conflict coaching is extremely helpful. And then mediation. If that
Mm.
if that doesn't work, then having somebody who is completely neutral, totally independent from the situation, who can enable both parties to say what they need to say in a safe way, enable them to be heard, and then to empower them to find their own solutions. So, not to intervene in the conflict in any shape or form, but just to bring those two parties together to enable them to get to next steps that reset their, that enable them to see the situation from each other's perspective, and create new understanding to get to those next steps that will reset your relationship and enable you to go forward, is invaluable. And I say that as a registered workplace mediator, and also somebody who has sought out mediation to resolve a workplace relationship in the past. So, I think its power is transformational, really, and I couldn't be a stronger advocate for it.
Even the passion that I can hear when you talk about that, that's correct. It's brilliant. Do you think there are any And it's probably like more of a general question, I guess. Do you think there are particular roles where it makes sense for there to be conflict coaching mixed in? So I guess what I'm thinking is traditionally people think of kind of mediation or conflict resolution that you'd go to your HR department. Do you think that applies to conflict coaching, or is that something that you think it would be useful for lots of different roles within the organisations to have experience of, so that there's a broad kind of brush approach to it? Or am I in the wrong ballpark?
Well, not from my perspective. I think it's really important that people across the organisation have conflicts coaching skills. I think if you are a manager, I'd love to see all managers have conflict coaching skills. I think you don't have to be a people manager. I think if you've got a passion for enabling workplace relationships and for recognizing that conflict is an inevitable part of those relationships, and that actually managed well, it can be, good for relationships and good for organizations. I think if you have that passion, then you can be a conflict coach, whether you're a people manager or not. And I think it's really important. And for me, conflict resolution skills should be as normal as all the technical training that you have in the workplace. I think it's just vital skill set in work and
I
out.
agree. And if there's anybody out there listening or watching, who is putting off having a difficult conversation, what would you say to them to help them kind of take that next step and be able to start that process?
I think working out what is stopping you is really useful, whether that's
Mm,
working it out for yourself or being able to talk to a trusted appropriate individual who can help you to work that out, often unblocks the situation. So
mm.
yeah, in the first instance, I think work out what's stopping you.
No, I agree. I think sometimes my internal compass is usually pretty good. Sometimes if I'm stopping myself from doing something, it's because I subconsciously know I shouldn't be doing it. So I guess that pushing yourself to do things piece is a really good thing to be aware of and kind of check yourself with. Or at least when I think about myself, anyway. I know we're not all the same.
No, true. And I think that's a useful compass, because if you're stopping yourself because you think, actually, I'm not in the right place to do this because I'm still feeling very emotional about this situation
Mm.
and I just might say something I regret, then actually it's really good that you're not having the conversation right now.
Oh, an internal compass.
Absolutely. And actually it's kind of a good realization to go, okay, so do I actually need to have this conversation? Is it important? If it is, okay, how do I get back to balanced and plan this conversation in a way that I am doing it for not only my interests, but actually I'm really thinking about the other person's interests in this conversation as well.
I think there's something kind of cultural about the way we avoid difficult conversations in the UK. I don't know if I'm completely not thinking in the right way, but I'm going to run with it because hopefully there are others that feel the same. Do you think there's a little bit of a kind of British stiff upper liftness to you don't want to cause offence or upset people, and that cultural piece stops us sometimes from dealing with issues?
Yes, I what immediately springs to mind. Well, let's try this. Finish this sentence, Trish. If you can't say anything nice,
Okay. Oh, don't say anything at all.
I don't know about you, but my mum brought me up with that phrase, usually when I was arguing with my brother. And I think we I think sometimes we define nice as saying things that immediately please people, that engender their good feeling towards us. And so we tend to think, well, actually, if we're going to upset, if we anticipate in upsetting somebody or embarrassing them, then maybe we're not being nice. And
Mm.
actually, for me, it is reframing nice and going, well, what is the benefit from the other person's point of view rather than from our point of view? And I'll give you a silly example to a certain extent, but well, maybe it's not silly, but so the first day in a new company, I was talking to the CEO over a networking lunch. First time I'd met him. He was about to go on stage to address the room, and he had a blob of mayonnaise at the side of his mouth. And in my head, there's two sides of a conversation going on while I'm conducting a conversation with him, going, oh, crumbs, he's got this blob of mayonnaise on the side of his mouth, and nobody else has told him. He's been walking around this room talking to everyone. Nobody else has told him. Maybe that's because it will be career limiting, so I should just keep my mouth shut. And then on the other side of my head is going, but he's about to stand up in front of the room. And what do you think would be most beneficial for him? Would he rather now before he got up, or would he rather look in the mirror afterwards and realize he's been speaking to a room of tens of people with food on his face? So I just said to him, oh, got a little bit of mayo by there. And he went, absolutely beetroot, muttered a thank you, and got away from me as quickly as he possibly could. And in that moment, I just went, oh no, maybe I shouldn't have done it. But actually, afterwards, he never mentioned the situation again. But every time we saw each other, he would come up to me and he would start talking about how things were. And, so my sense was that actually it was the right thing to do, even though the easier thing to do actually would have been to say nothing.
Love that, because that's a really nice way to demonstrate why it's important to say things, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think we're pretty much at time. As much as I've enjoyed having a chat with you, and I look forward to having multiple other chats with you, obviously, I think we're pretty much done in terms of the length that we've got for this session. Is there anything else that you want to go over, or anything else that you think it's important for people to know before we finish?
No, I think it's okay to find this subject difficult. I think it's
Hmm.
and it's okay to ask for help. In fact, it's a good thing to ask for help. And over time, it gets easier. You still make mistakes, but you do it better more of the time.
Well, look, thank you so much for your time, Lynn. I really appreciate it. I will make sure that all of your contact details are available in whichever way you are digesting this information. But thank you so much, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Trish. See you soon.
See you.